LB, as someone who has been your tagline on Twitter is just mob. You've been saying this for 8 years now, and you have a whole podcast about it called The World Beneath for anyone unaware who's watching. And you know all about this stuff and about specifically Donald Trump's long history with the mafia, both Italian and Russian. What did you see looking at his behavior as he's intimidating witnesses and stuff today?
I mean, well, welcome to the mob. This is it. So of course there's, I think there's stuff we probably don't know about yet that maybe Judge Merchan was just sort of passing over. So typically you've got with these trials where there's accountability happening, it's going to be, and I'm going to sort of the era before Donald, Fred's era. His dad, he was the business front. That's the business that built a $400 million empire, was all on being the business front for organized crime, the crime families in New York in terms of real estate and development. And you'll hear people maybe in the media try to couch that, now that they're talking about it again as if it's some new thing, couch that as like, well, it's New York. And so anybody who was involved in construction had to kind of do business with the mafia. That's not what the Trump family is, which is why you're hearing so much deflection about the Biden crime family, because the Trump family is actually a crime family. It's a generationally. So it's a business that Donald inherited. It was his first real foray into it was set up, and you guys have heard me say this many, many times. It's worth just constantly repeating. With the concrete cartel. He tells that story of, I wanted to build in Manhattan. My dad told me that's not our territory. And then he has this little thing he says where he gave me $1 million to start my project. And that's how I built the big Trump empire. When none of the last part of it's true. But I have no doubt that Fred said, that's not our territory. You can't build in Manhattan because the crime family that Fred was primarily the front for, and the work. I mean, he did work. They had a real company. He developed all these properties, but he developed them with and for the Genovese crime family. And so the Manhattan, where Donald wanted to build Trump Tower, was not, they didn't have a deal like that. That's a different crime family. That was a Gambino crime family in that. And you've all maybe heard the old tapes of, Sammy the Bull Gravano talking about how he built Manhattan with concrete, and that he looks at it and he marvels at it. And people like Donald Trump would never have had anything without him. And that's true. So at that time, it was Paul Castellano that was head of the Gambino crime family. I heard John Cody's name drop this week by Tim O'Brien, talking about how John Cody had an apartment in Trump Tower. Everybody should know. And Cody was a big gangster and mobster. He ran the Teamster concrete side of things. And he kept his mistress. He was building something for his mistress in Trump Tower. That was all like this Trump Tower thing being this concrete when everybody had moved to steel was because, yes, Donald was in business with the mafia, but it really, the origins of it were the origins of what became known as the concrete cartel. So in order for Donald to develop and build a property in Manhattan, two crime families had to come to an agreement of how they were going to allow this to happen. Like who gets what, right? If the Genovese business fronts are moving in, and if Salerno at that time was the head of the Genovese crime family, and Donald wants to develop in Manhattan, then the Fat Tony Salerno is going to have to do a deal with Paul Castellano. And so a commission was formed of the 5 heads of the families. And they had a commission already. We know about you see those old De Niro movies where they touch on this, where everyone was out, back in the days of, Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano, these great big mobsters, and they all got caught in a cornfield in upstate New York, and they went running from the feds because they were having their commission meeting, right? So yes, a commission existed, but the commission in terms of how Manhattan would be developed was the heads of the 5 families. And the first time they chose to work together, as we know is recorded history, and there may be other times, but this is what we know in the court history, was for Fred, for his boy Donald. And that was what became known as the commission trials, right? To go after the concrete cartel. And the concrete cartel, where it was bid fixing and rigging in the city of New York, the greater metropolitan area of New York City, where the like 7 bids would go into the city to build a particular project, but all 7 of them, those were prefixed bids from mafia-controlled companies. And then the winning bid, whoever got the winning bid, was already decided ahead of time because they knew they were going to develop it. So how Trump was able to do this was Fat Tony Salerno and Paul Castellano formed a company called S&A Concrete. John Gotti, head of the Teamsters Union for the concrete, was the one, that chapter, overseeing the project. And that's the company that did the bid rigging to get the job in order to build Trump Tower. But it all been predetermined ahead of time. That key piece of evidence and was captured on FBI audio tapes as the commission trials were going after the first big application of the RICO Act for mafia families to go after this concrete cartel and take out the heads of the 5 families, the very case that Rudy Giuliani supposedly made his big thing on. This is what it is. So he's not just any construction person around Manhattan that has to kind of, all right, I got to pay off a mobster in order to build my thing, or da 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 da. He's literally from the bowels of the commission of the concrete cartel. Donald Trump would not exist as a personality even today if it weren't for 2 mafia bosses agreeing on the commission to form a company in order to build Fred's boys' tower, which was really for them, with John Gotti overseeing it. That's a very different story. You need to tell the story that way. So that's who Donald is. That's all he's ever known. These are the only businessmen he's ever known. This is it, as in terms of raised at his father's knee. This is how his paradigm for the world, this is how he thinks the world works, right? He was caught in several, and I think in that trial, I can't imagine the FBI wouldn't have knocked on his doors like, your name is being dropped all over these tapes, right? And we're having this big, huge trial. So tell us what you know. I'm sure he handed over information at that point in time. We know that he did hand over information during his money laundering trial for the Atlantic City casinos, because all of a sudden all those indictments disappeared, and boop, Ivankov, a Russian gangster, who was hiding out and was all of a sudden in custody, and they've been trying to find this guy forever. So he had a Philly crew. He was in with the Philadelphia mob also in developing Atlantic City. So this is all arranged by his father, and it's all he's ever known. So what are we seeing now in this trial? You're seeing how an actual organized crime boss, even though he's a business front, operates. It's the same operation. It's just happening in the courtroom. So it's thuggery, right? We've got, what's thuggery in a courtroom? I don't know what they might have done to Mershon. I can't imagine he didn't get some kind of phone call or passerby like what Stormy Daniels had when she had her kid, like some kind of, they'll threaten judges. They want it, like, we don't have this guy in our pocket. Can you get a hold of his financials? You know, God only knows what's going on there that we don't know this happened. But the other first moves are going to be witness intimidation. Yeah, that happens now, right?
Check.
Who the witnesses are, so we can intimidate them. And jury tampering. So that's happening now as well. What's coming down the pipe from that is you're going to see false testimony. You're going to see chaos. You're going to see press we already have this, that's sort of in the bag for him, that's going to carry things to try to sway public opinion, try to influence everything. And you're going to
Jesse Waters, go fuck yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, you're going to see all that stuff. And you're going to hear a lot of moaning and complaining. One of the things we would see for the day of the mobsters that Donald knew and that Fred was in business with, is you'd see the older guys, like certainly his age, he's up there, Donald, right? You'd see those old codgers like him come in frail. Like they might wear like oxygen masks. They're being wheeled in the wheelchair, right? And they just play this sort of victim. You had, there was an infamous mobster who spent 2 years pretending he had lost his mind, walking around in a bathrobe while he was running. He's running things from his kitchen and had no idea the feds had a wiretap in there. And that was all to avoid some type of sentencing or some type of coming out with a conviction in whatever they were being held to in trial. Donald is in a crisis here, and he's in an early crisis for a mafia don, right? So, and his crisis is happening around this courtroom. So I think we're going to start to see some flailing. And the crisis is this, and they all face this. I'm a master of a universe in a shadow world. And so I can't let anybody know I'm the master of the universe, or that means I'm guilty. Right? That's what mafia bosses face. And eventually, as they're looking at the end of their life, they all find a writer and they all write about it because they're like, I can't die and not have the world know everything that I built, everything that I controlled. These are the men that had global empires. They were masters of the universe. Where it's different for Donald is he didn't run the world, and then he got the president. And so he got to brag about running the world and right. And he got to have all that glory already. And so because of that, and because it's so key to his identity and strength and being a strong way, so key to his identity, he can't play the frail card, then have his crisis and write his biography about how he really was the master of the universe. He wasn't just this frail old man, that just ran a orange stand, a fruit stand on the corner, right? Where that from?
I'm just a businessman.
Just a businessman.
I'm a humble businessman.
Importing my olive oil, my tomatoes, growing my tomatoes. Carlos Marcello, famous for that, right? So he's kind of stuck, but he's going to have an existential crisis when it feels like he can't control the law anymore. As I said, this is a man who was a front for the real masters of the universe and who got himself out of trouble by being a rat. He did. Yep. That's why he was never caught. Those are the deals that Donald has made. I'm the deal. I do deals. The art of the deal. He was doing deals with the Justice Department so that he didn't go to prison. So he didn't get indicted. Those are his deals.
What do you call it when that happens? Isn't there a word for it when you give evidence and you don't get to go to jail? Whatever you say, they can't indict. What's the word for that?
Yeah, I have immunity.
Right. Oh my God. It's almost like he's been talking about that constantly all week.
Like
wow.
He's going, immunity. And I think there's a point where we'll watch and see. I predict there's a good chance, not 100%, but there's a good chance. If this case looks like it's crushing down on him, or the next case crushing down on him, and he is going to face a verdict and possibly a conviction. If he can start to feel that he doesn't have control over the law anymore, that's where I think he might get reckless, like those old men that are his predecessors facing the death, right? That's the existential threat. And I think we'll start hearing him going, I have immunity because I have a deal with the Justice Department. I control the Justice Department. I have deals with the Justice Department. I just can't see he won't control himself. That's when we know the restraint is gone. Right now, even though it looks like he's unrestrained with witness intimidation and jury tampering, and God knows what he's trying with this judge, trust me, that's restraint. That's restraint for this world that this man comes from. That's being in control, that thuggery. There's a point where the thuggery doesn't work, and it's clear the thuggery is not going to work, where he will lose control, really lose control.
And not just of his bowels.
Then he's going to start telling who he really is and what his shit was, because he does not want to go to prison, and he doesn't want to go to his grave without anybody knowing that he actually, at one point in his worldview, controlled the Justice Department because he could get off from anything. Anyway, that's my big long.
I love it.
That's my take on the trials.
Clip this whole segment. Get it up there. That's what I say. Clip the whole thing. All right. There's one thing though that doesn't ring true though that you said. Like, okay, they made Trump Tower. They made this concrete thing. You said like it was a mob thing, but I mean, if it was a mob place, if Trump Tower was really a mob place, wouldn't there be organized criminals living and operating in Trump Tower?
Yeah.
Oh wait, there were fucking dozens of them. Never mind.
All there.
My bad.
Then it turned into, why did it turn into an intelligence thing with Donald? Why do we have the Saudis? Why do we have the Chinese? Why do we have the Russian mobsters and the Russian spies crawling all over him? Well, because as we have laid out many, many times before, there was a point in organized crime in the fight for the 5 families in New York City, especially, and specifically the crime family that Fred worked for, that when the Russian mafia rolled in, right, and then especially in the 90s, early 90s, they just rolled up that crime family because that's the way Russians did it. And there is no Russian mafia without the Kremlin. There's no separation. There's no daylight between it's an arm of the Kremlin. If not the Kremlin is an arm of the Russian mafia. Yeah, that's the great debate, depending on if you're talking to somebody like me who studies organized crime, or you're talking to somebody who studies intelligence. You know, that's the two sides of the coin that we see a different way. I think that the Kremlin's an arm.
Tomato, potato.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be a kleptocracy, and a mafia state. So, and there's no getting in business, even as spies, there's no getting in business with organized crime and not having it take you over. So it's just what it does. It's fascism, but there's no being in politics with organized crime and not having it take you over. That's what fascism really is. If you look at Mussolini, especially, he was a gangster. That was all about getting rid of the rule of law, getting rid of accountability so that he could rape and pillage at will and hoard it all for himself and for his cronies.